It was just past 6 a.m. in Los Angeles, the kind of early morning when the city still feels like it's dreaming. Fog lingered low over the streets, and most people were still clinging to their pillows. Gosh. But inside a no-frills gym tucked between an old boxing club and a vintage record store, Lionel Messi was already working up a sweat. No glamour, no cameras. Just the rhythmic hum of weights clanking and the soft thuds of fists hitting heavy bags. Liked it this way away from the spotlight, where he could train without fanfare. The place was gritty, plastered with faded fight posters and smelling faintly of liniment and ambition. Messi had found a strange kind of peace here during his off-season. With a resistance band in hand and wireless headphones in his ears, he focused on building strength, movement, core stability details most people overlook, but that legends never ignore. A few nods from regulars acknowledged his presence, but no one bothered him. That is until Nate "Bulldog" Branson walked in. Nate was a former MMA fighter once promising, now battling obscurity and personal demons. The gym had been his sanctuary long before Messi arrived, and to him, this wasn't just a training ground, it was all he had left. He had been sparring hard that morning, trying to push through a storm in his own mind. When he saw Messi in his space wearing a focused, almost meditative look, something snapped. It wasn't jealousy. Not exactly. It was deeper than that. Nate felt invisible in his own story, a ghost in a world that used to chant his name. Seeing Messi calm, composed, admired by billions, was like holding a mirror to every regret Nate had ever swallowed. Fueled by impulse, sweat, and misdirected frustration, he marched toward the football legend. He didn't plan it. Yes, he just acted. He threw a shoulder bump that caught Messi off guard. Messi turned with a surprised glance, offering a calm nod, maybe even an invitation, to shake hands and diffuse the moment. But Nate wasn't thinking clearly. His fist rose faster than reason, and he landed a body shot right under Messi's ribs. Not hard enough to break, but hard enough to shock. The gym went silent in an instant. Someone dropped a dumbbell. A jump. Rope stopped mid-swing. Time seemed to freeze for a moment as everyone registered what had just happened. Messi didn't retaliate. He stepped back, one hand instinctively going to his side, his eyes meeting Nate's not with anger, but with a mix of disbelief and quiet strength. Before anyone else could react, before staff could rush in or tempers could boil over, a voice, unmistakable and full of gravity, echoed through the gym like a line out of a movie script. "Hey, that's not how champions behave." Every head turned. There, standing near the ring, taping his hands and watching it all unfold, was none other than Sylvester Stallone. The Hollywood legend had been training quietly for a boxing-themed film and had kept to himself, blending in among the regulars. But now he stepped forward, not as an actor, but as someone who understood the weight of pride and pain. He walked up to Nate, stopping just a foot away, and looked him straight in the eyes. "You've got power, kid," he said in that gravelly, unmistakable voice. But real power? Real power is knowing when not to use it. Then he turned to Messi and asked softly, "You good?" Messi nodded, still composed, and then did something no one expected. He offered his hand to Nate, a gesture not of forgiveness yet, but of possibility. The moment could have ended there. Could have been another viral clip, another controversy. Something shifted in the room. People saw not just a fight or a celebrity headline, but something more humanifracture that could turn into a bridge. The trainer in the corner lowered his phone, realizing he'd captured more than just a scuffle. Outside, the sun had begun to burn through the fog, and inside, that worn-down gym, a spark of something remarkable had just ignited. The kind of moment that might hurt when it lands, but heals much louder when it's heard. Asterisk word of the gym incident traveled faster than anyone expected. Not through dramatic headlines or official press releases, but through whispers, grainy, cell phone clips, and a growing buzz online. Messi's silence in the face of a surprise punch had stunned the world. But what surprised them even more was what he did afterward, how he didn't lash out. Didn't call for a lawsuit or bodyguards, but instead stood his ground with quiet grace. Within hours, the moment was dissected on social media, praised by fans, and replayed on sports networks everywhere. The footage showed a rare kind of restraint, a form of strength that didn't need fists to prove itself. Somewhere across the city, Cristiano Ronaldo had seen the video. He had been in Los Angeles for a few days, shooting ads for a high-end brand, balancing his usual commitments with a few hours of light training. He watched the clip on his phone in silence, the image of Messi standing calm after being struck. Burned into his mind? It didn't look like a publicity stunt. It didn't feel like a marketing opportunity. It felt real, personal, and something about it didn't sit right with him. Though Ronaldo and Messi had shared the same stage for over a decade, traded goals, golden boots, and Ballon d'Ors, their rivalry had always existed in the eyes of fans, more than between the men themselves. Off the field, they shared a mutual respect, one that only a few in the world could truly understand. The pressure, the weight of billions watching, the need to be perfect every second. So when he saw Messi being treated with such disrespect by a stranger in a place that should have been safe, something stirred inside him, without alerting media or entourage. Ronaldo made a quiet phone call, and the next morning, he stepped into the same gym. No announcement, no flashbulbs, just a hoodie pulled low, a duffel bag, and determination in his step. The gym regulars, already on edge from the prior day's drama, did double takes when they saw him. Was this really happening? Messi was back to warming up near the mats, a light bruise forming on his ribs, but his focus intact. When their eyes met, there was no awkwardness, no competition. Ronaldo gave a half smile, the kind that only two old warriors could exchange, and walked over with a subtle nod. So, he said in a low voice, just enough for Messi to hear, "You're making gym history now too?" Messi let out a breath, chuckling under his breath, unintentionally. They sat down on a nearby bench, no cameras hovering, just a quiet space between two legends. After a few moments of silence, Ronaldo looked at him and asked, "Why didn't you react?" Messi paused, then answered simply, "Because I could see it wasn't about me." That answer lingered, as the gym returned to its usual rhythm. Stallone, who had been watching from the ringside again, approached the pair with the unmistakable presence of a man who's lived through more than a few cinematic moments. His eyes lit up as he leaned in slightly, voice lowered like he was pitching a scene to a director. "Listen," Stallone said, glancing from Messi to Ronaldo. "You two just changed the mood in this place. One moment of chaos, followed by something rare: respect, grace, unity." Ronaldo raised an eyebrow. "What are you getting at?" "I'm saying," Stallone continued, "maybe that punch was just the beginning of something bigger. Second chance for the guy who threw it, and for everyone watching." Messi folded his arms, listening carefully. "What if," Stallone said, voice thick with conviction, "you turn this into something that helps people? A moment that goes beyond football, beyond fighting, beyond even fame?" Ronaldo leaned back slightly, intrigued now. "Like what?" Stallone smiled. "Like taking the whole thing, this Messi, flipping it on its head. Redemption, kindness, sportsmanship. Something the world actually needs right now." Messi's eyes met Ronaldo's again. They didn't need to say much. They'd been rivals for years, but in that moment, they were simply two men who had both known glory and scrutiny in equal measure. Two men who understood the power of using their platform for more than applause. And just like that, without a press conference or a hashtag, something started to take shape. Something real. Something that would soon involve not just forgiveness, but purpose. The kind of story that might have started with a punch, but would end with something far more powerful. The following day, the gym had a strange calm to it, like the quiet after a storm. The buzz from the incident still lingered in the corners of conversation, but something deeper was beginning to grow. It wasn't just about the punch anymore. It was about what came next. The world had already seen the footage, but what they hadn't seen were the conversations unfolding in that same gym. Away from the noise, where something unexpected was taking root, Nate "Bulldog" Branson sat, alone near the old water fountain, his towel draped over his shoulders, his head down. He hadn't slept much. Adrenaline from yesterday had long faded, replaced by an ache deeper than muscle soreness, guilt, embarrassment. He had struck Lionel Messi, the Lionel Messi, not out of hate, but out of confusion. misdirection, a heavy cocktail of personal failures and unresolved resentment. And yet, there were no police, no lawsuits, no public shaming. Instead, there was only the replay in his head and the memory of Messi's calm gaze and extended hand. He was still sitting there, wrestling with his thoughts when he heard footsteps. At first, he didn't look up. It's probably just another regular. But then a voice broke the silence, low and familiar. "Mind if we sit?" Nate looked up to see Messi and Ronaldo standing side by side. No fanfare, no camera crews, just a quiet presence that made the air shift. For a moment, Nate didn't know what to say. He expected judgment, maybe even confrontation. Instead, Messi pulled over a stool and sat. Ronaldo leaned casually against a weight rack, arms folded, expression unreadable but calm. "I don't get it," Nate muttered after a long pause. "Why are you two here? Why are you even talking to me after that?" Messi exchanged a glance with Ronaldo, then said quietly, "Because what happened wasn't just about the punch. It was about something deeper. And maybe that's worth understanding." Ronaldo chimed in. "You've been through some things. We all have. You've lost your spot, your fights, your future, maybe even your identity. I get that. It messes with your head. But you made a mistake. That doesn't mean it has to define you." Nate swallowed hard. "So what, you're saying I get a second chance just like that?" No, Messi replied. "We're saying you earn it, starting now." That's when Stallone appeared. Like fate itself had called for a scene change, tossed a notepad onto the bench between them. On the top page were scribbled ideas, messy, half-formed, but burning with possibility. "A charity event," Stallone said with that unmistakable rasp. "Something people won't expect. Football, MMA, maybe even a little boxing thrown in. Something that brings everyone together. Kids, families, fans. No more headlines about what went wrong. It's just a new story about what can go right." Nate picked up the notepad slowly. His hand shook a little. There, in Stallone's barely legible handwriting, were words that hit harder than any punch. Kindness, redemption, brotherhood, purpose. "You want me in this?" Nate asked, still unsure whether this was a dream or a test. Messi nodded. "If you're ready to show the world who you really are," Ronaldo smirked slightly, "don't worry. We'll make sure you don't embarrass yourself on the field. Much." A small laugh escaped from Nate's chest, genuine and unexpected. It was the first time in months he'd laughed without irony or anger. For the first time, he saw a way forward. Not as a fighter clawing to stay relevant, but as a man given a rare opportunity to rewrite his story, not erase the past, but build something better on top of it. They talked for another hour, fleshing out ideas. Friendly exhibition Messi and Ronaldo would showcase their skills. Nate would demonstrate the discipline of MMA. There would be drills, challenges, even a short sparring demo. Proceeds would go to children's rehab centers in Nate's hometown of Flint, Michigan, a place that had suffered quietly while the world looked away. Messi leaned in before leaving and added one last thought. Simple but profound. The punch. You threw? That's not the moment that matters. What you do after, that's what the world will remember. And with that, the stage was set not for a grudge match, but for a transformation. Not just of a man, but of a message. A new kind of story had begun to unfold, one not rooted in conflict, but in connection, courage, and the choice to turn pain into purpose. Asterisk, the weeks that followed became something out of a strange, beautiful dream, one that none of the men had planned for, but all of them embraced. What started as a viral gym incident was slowly transforming into something far bigger than just a publicity stunt or a redemption arc. It was turning into a movement trio, raw and rooted in something rare. Unity through shared struggle. Every morning, the gym buzzed with a new energy. Cameras were still banned except for a small crew documenting the training for the eventual charity event. But that didn't stop people from lining up outside just to catch a glimpse of what was unfolding inside. And what they would have seen, had they been allowed in, was something entirely unexpected. Nate Branson, the once feared, once forgotten MMA fighter, was struggling to juggle a football. Under Messi's guidance, he was learning the basics. Dribbling between cones, controlling passes, understanding angles, balance, and breathing. At first, it was a comedy show. Nate stumbled, kicked wide, and tripped over his own feet more than once. Messi never mocked him. Instead, he encouraged, corrected gently, and often demonstrated moves with effortless grace that made it look like the ball obeyed him. Slowly, Nate began to pick it up, not perfectly, but with heart. On the other side of the gym, Ronaldo was lacing up lightweight MMA gloves, gearing up to enter a discipline completely foreign to his world. Nate, once the aggressor, was now the teacher. He showed Ronaldo how to square up, how to keep his guard up, how to move in the cage with controlled aggression. Ronaldo, being the relentless perfectionist he was, didn't just mimic movements. He studied them, practiced until his arms trembled, and repeated drills long after most would have tapped out. He was out of his comfort zone and loving it. The roles were reversed, yet everyone remained grounded. There was no ego here, no competition, just mutual respect and shared growth. The idea of the event had begun as a simple charity showcase. But as training progressed, it became clear that it was becoming something much deeper in experience that would challenge each of them, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Stallone, ever present and observant, acted as a philosophical coach. He wasn't just there to cheer them on, he was the soul of the project. Between workouts, he sat them down for late-night conversations over protein shakes and black coffee, speaking not just as a movie icon, but as a man who had clawed his way through countless personal and professional battles. His voice carried weight not just from his famous characters, but from the real man behind them. "You guys think this is about football or fighting," he once said, pacing the locker room, his hands wrapped in old boxing tape, "but it's not. It's about learning how to get up again. Every one of you has taken a hit physically. Emotionally, in the media, this isn't training. This is therapy, gentlemen, and the audience. They need it too." Outside the gym, the ripple effect was already being felt. Word got around that the trio was working on something special, and soon, community organizations reached out to be involved. Youth clinics sent letters. Former athletes sent messages of support. A shipment of secondhand gear from Europe arrived anonymously, tagged simply, for the kids in Flint. They began inviting local teens to the gym kids from tough neighborhoods, some of them on the brink of losing their way. Nate took a special interest in them. Maybe he saw pieces of his younger self in their eyes, raw, angry, searching for purpose. He trained them with patience he didn't know he had, teaching them jabs and takedowns, but also how to breathe, how to control emotion, how to walk away when walking away was harder than throwing a punch. Messi brought a different kind of magic. He played pickup matches with kids in the parking lot, slipping between them with soft touches and laughter that echoed down the block. He signed every ball, posed for every picture, but more importantly, he listened. He made the quiet kids feel seen. His humility was a magnet for anyone who needed hope, and Ronaldo became the engine behind the scenes. He organized donations, bought cleats and gloves out of his own pocket, coordinated with designers for the event's promotion. He might have been the most famous of them all, but he was also the one who cleaned the mats after a long sparring session without being asked. Together, they weren't just preparing for a performance. They were building a foundation for something lasting. Their event was no longer just a fundraiser. It was becoming a symbol of what could happen when differences were set aside, when egos were checked at the door, and when men used their influence, not to elevate themselves, but to lift others. It was an unlikely brotherhood formed through adversity. And every bead of sweat, every laugh after a failed drill, every kid who walked out of that gym standing a little taller, proved that this was no gimmick. This was real. This was redemption in motion. The night of the event arrived like thunder on the horizon, anticipated, electric, and impossible to ignore. What had once been a modest idea scrawled on Stallone's notepad had grown into something grander than anyone imagined. Civic Center in Flint, Michigan now stood glowing with light and life, transformed into a hybrid air-and-a-half football pitch, half MA caged with stands packed to the rafters. Months of training, setbacks, healing, and silent transformation had all led to this one evening. Inside the venue, the air was heavy with emotion. Not just excitement, but something deeper. A sense that something meaningful was about to unfold. Families with young children, retired athletes, former fighters, football fans, and even people who had never stepped into a gym in their lives had gathered not for a fight but for a feeling. They weren't sure what exactly to expect, but they knew it wasn't going to be ordinary. The arena lights dimmed, and a montage flickered across massive screens above the field. It showed a young boy in a dusty alley juggling a football, fighter lacing up gloves in silence, a stadium roaring for a goal, and then the punch. That viral moment replayed, a gasp from the crowd. And then, just as the tension peaked, it shifted to Messi's quiet hand of forgiveness. Ronaldo's arrival? Nate's return to the gym, children training, Stallone's voice over the clips like a heartbeat, said only one thing: we fall, so we can rise different. The spotlight beamed down on the center of the arena, and Messi walked out first, not in a flashy jersey, but in a simple training top, his expression calm, focused, and full of grace. The roar that erupted was deafening. Fans chanted his name, waving signs not of stats but of words like peace, respect, and hope. Then came Ronaldo, striding confidently, every bit the showman, but this time with a different fire behind his eyes. He smiled, raised a hand to the crowd, then pointed to Messi and bowed his head, a public nod of respect that sent a surge through the arena. And then, unexpectedly, it was Nate Branson who received the loudest ovation. He emerged from the shadows of the tunnel, not as a villain or cautionary tale, but as a man transformed. He wore a plain black hoodie with the words "earned, not given" on the back. And when he stepped into the ring-turned stage, he looked out at the audience not with shame but with a steady, vulnerable kind of strength. The event unfolded like a symphony in orthodox, heartfelt, and inspiring. First came the football showcase. Ronaldo and Messi joined local kids from Flint in a short, fast-paced match. Laughter echoed as they passed the ball to young players who couldn't believe their idols were feeding them assists. Nate in goal dove with exaggerated flair, letting in just enough goals to keep spirits high, but blocking a few to show he still had fight in him. Messi's assist to a shy 10-year-old girl ended in her first ever goal, and she dropped to her knees, sobbing with joy. Ronaldo scooped her up and carried her around the field like she'd just won the World Cup. It was chaotic, beautiful, and unforgettable. After the match, the stage transitioned into a light contact MMA demonstration. Nate, now in his element, coached both Messi and Ronaldo through basic moves, clinches, takedowns, blocks, nothing dangerous, just skillful movement and camaraderie. The crowd cheered as Messi executed a clean hip toss on Nate, the smallest man in the ring, showing that precision and timing could defy brute force. When Ronaldo successfully escaped a hold after days of drilling it and training, he raised his arms as if he'd just scored a winning penalty. The crowd responded with a roar of approval. Then came a moment of silence. Stallone took the microphone and stepped into the center. He didn't need a script. His presence alone calmed the noise like a wave. He looked out over the sea of faces, took a breath, began to speak. "We came here tonight not to fight, but to remember what real strength looks like. Not this." He held up a gloved fist, "but this." He reached out and took Nate's hand, then Messi's, then Ronaldo's. This unity, this forgiveness, this willingness to grow together. That's the legacy. The crowd stood. In unison, applause grew, not wild or frenzied, but long, steady, and full of meaning. Donations poured in on digital screens. QR codes flashed across the jumbotron. Within minutes, the goal was surpassed, hundreds of thousands raised.
Enough.
To rebuild Flint's youth training center, reopen the closed-down public gym, and fund year-long mentorship programs for at-risk youth. But what mattered more than the money was the message. As the lights dimmed and the night began to close, something unexpected happened. The audience, without being prompted, turned on their phone flashlights one by one until the arena was glowing, like a field of stars. And in the center of it all, three men who had once seemed galaxies apart, one football magician, one global icon, and one broken fighter finding his way stood together. not as celebrities, but as symbols of second chances, no. Trophies were handed out. No belts were awarded. Something far more powerful was one that night the trust of a crowd, the redemption of a name, and the reminder that even when stories begin in pain, they can still end in purpose. Asterisk in the days and weeks that followed. The unforgettable night in Flint, the world seemed to pause, not in shock, but in reflection. What had unfolded in that old civic center echoed far beyond the event itself. It wasn't just a story anymore. It had become a spark, a ripple of hope, moving outward, touching places the organizers never thought it would reach. The footage from the event went viral, of course, not because of flashy moves or dramatic confrontations, but because of the raw emotion it captured: authentic kindness, humility, and unity between men who had every reason to remain separate. There was no manufactured drama, no corporate slogan. Behind it, it was simply human, and that made it powerful. News outlets across the world replayed the highlights again and again. Messi gently guiding a nervous child into position for a goal. Ronaldo bowing to the crowd after being outmaneuvered by a teenage midfielder. Nate Branson, once scorned as a disgraced fighter, helping a kid with cerebral palsy stand and throw. A punch for the first time, both of them grinning like champions. Those images weren't just heartwarming, they were transformative. Within a month, the donations that had started during the event multiplied. Flint's struggling youth rehabilitation center, once facing permanent closure, was now fully funded for the next 3 years. A brand new multi-sport complex was already under construction, complete with football pitches, an indoor MMA mat, and even a small library for educational programs. The place that had once felt abandoned was now alive with possibility. Nate Branson moved back to Flint not as a fallen fighter trying to hide from his past, but as a man determined to shape the future. Every morning he opened the doors to the community gym, teaching classes in boxing, self-defense, and discipline. But more than punches and footwork, he taught resilience. Every kid who walked through that door knew Nate's story. He didn't hide it. He used it. His mistake had become his message. Anger unchecked can destroy, but forgiveness has the power to rebuild. Meanwhile, Messi returned to his quiet routines, but something in him had changed too. He began sending monthly support to the Flint Youth Center without telling the press. He held an impromptu meet and greet in Rosario with kids from underprivileged neighborhoods and told them the story, not of his goals or glory, but of the punch that turned into peace. Every wound, he told them, is a door to something better if you have the courage to walk through it. Ronaldo, too, carried the impact of the event with him. In interviews, he spoke not about his career or stats, but about that night in Michigan. He launched a mentorship fund for young athletes struggling with pressure, mental health, or anger management. He hosted joint football clinics with MMA fighters in Portugal, promoting the balance of strength and emotional control. "We're more than what we win," he said during one of the sessions. "We're who we become after losing." Stallone, having seen the event's success, declined every major Hollywood offer to turn it into a scripted film. He told one interviewer, "Aren't meant to be packaged. They're meant to be lived. What those men did, what those kids became. That's bigger than cinema." Instead, he worked quietly behind the scenes to help other athletes and actors find similar projects, ones that prioritized people over performance, healing over headlines. Around the world, the ripple effects continued. Other cities picked up the model events that mixed sport, mentorship, and redemption. Paris held a football meets fencing charity night. São Paulo hosted an MMA exhibition with formerly incarcerated youth alongside Olympic athletes. In Seoul, a silent football match raised awareness for mental health among teenagers, inspired directly by the Flint event, and then came something no one expected. Hashtag Power of Forgiveness trended for 48 hours across platforms, not from influencers or celebrities, but from ordinary people. Survivors of bullying, former rivals turned friends. Fathers reconciling with sons, students apologizing to teachers. People sharing how the story of Nate Messi and Ronaldo gave them the courage to extend a hand instead of holding a grudge. One video stood out. A boy from Flint, maybe 11 or 12, recording a message on an old iPhone. He stood on the steps of the gym, grinning wide. "Mr. Nate taught me how to punch right," he said. "But more important, he taught me when not to punch at all." The video racked up millions of views. Nate reposted it with just one caption: "This hit harder than any fight I ever had." The city of Flint, long burdened by hardship, was now carrying something else: hope. Not because it had suddenly been fixed or saved by fame, but because it had been seen, uplifted, and given the tools to rise on its own terms. The scars were still there, sure. But now they were part of the story, a story rewritten by the very people who once thought they had lost the plot. And through it all, from opposite ends of the globe, Messi and Ronaldo remained connected. Through rivalry, but through something deeper, the quiet knowledge that for once, they hadn't just played the game, they had changed it. Asterisk months had passed since that unforgettable night in Flint. But its legacy didn't fade, it evolved. What began as a one-time act of redemption grew into something far more permanent, rooted not just in memory, but in movement. The punch that had once threatened to divide became the spark that united, not only a gym or a town, but people across countries, backgrounds, and generations. Somehow, without a trophy or title involved, this moment had become one of the most defining stories in sports history for Nate Branson. The journey didn't end under the arena lights. If anything, that was only the first chapter in a new life. He no longer walked with the weight of shame pressing on his shoulders. His mornings were no longer filled with regret, but responsibility. Each day, he opened the doors of the rebuilt Flint Community Training Center, now a bustling hub of activity where kids trained, laughed, failed, and got back up again. Some of them came from broken homes. Others were just trying to stay out of trouble. All of them found purpose in the rhythm of gloves hitting pads and shoes sprinting down the turf. Branson didn't become a hero overnight, but he became something more valuable, dependable, someone who showed up, who stayed, who gave without expecting applause. Local parents who had once whispered about his fall now greeted him with warmth and trust. Some even volunteered alongside him. The man who had once gone viral for all the wrong reasons was now helping others find their footing before they lost theirs. And yet, for all the growth happening on the ground, it was the quiet ripple in people's hearts that truly marked the success of that night. Around the world, the story became a reference point for change. Schools adopted it into character education programs. Professors assigned essays about it. A children's book inspired by the event, The Day of the Ball. And the gloves shook hands, became a bestseller, filled with illustrations of forgiveness, teamwork, and resilience. Hospitals played the match highlights in waiting rooms. Even corporate leadership seminars dissected the story not for marketing lessons, but for insights into humility and accountability. For Messi, the story followed him not like a shadow, but like a gentle echo, whispering to him in press conferences, fan letters, and late-night interviews. But he never claimed ownership of it. Whenever asked, he downplayed his role. "I didn't fix anything," he'd say softly. "I just made a choice. We all did." Still, he carried the weight of what it meant. He began showing up more quietly. At grassroots football programs, not for photos, but for presence. Sometimes he just watched from the sidelines, speaking to young players, one by one, making them feel seen. Not every kid recognized what he had done in Flint, but many of them walked away believing in kindness a little more than they had before. Ronaldo, too, had been changed. He started the Second Win Project, a foundation focused on giving struggling athletes a second shot, whether they were recovering from injury, addiction, or simply a collapse of confidence. It wasn't a headline-grabbing initiative, but it became one of the most quietly impactful efforts he'd ever led. In his speeches now, there was less flash, more truth. He told crowds that strength without restraint is weakness, and that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is admit he's not perfect. And Stallone, more than anyone, watched it all with the pride of a mentor who had simply lit the match and stepped back. He visited Flint every now and then, not with cameras, but with books, gear, and ideas. Sometimes he just sat in the back of the training center, hoodie up, watching young fighters move with purpose. When someone asked once if he was there to film, he smiled and said, "No, I'm just here to remember why the stories matter." What made this moment timeless was that it didn't end in a final whistle. It lived on in acts both large and invisible. In a teenager choosing to walk away from a fight, in a coach choosing to listen instead of yell, in two teammates once enemies working together to organize a youth camp. It was in apologies written on paper, in fists unclenched, in a world that felt a little more willing to try again. No brand had sponsored the moment. No league had engineered it. It had grown organically, watered by pain, honesty, and the audacity of grace. And in the years to come, long after careers ended and stadiums emptied, the story of that one mistake followed by one decision to make it. Right dash remained. There would be documentaries, murals, speeches, but none of them could quite capture the look in Nate's eyes when he stood in that ring beside Messi and Ronaldo, surrounded by lights and chants, not as the man who struck but as the man who chose to stand differently when given the chance. That was the real victory. That was the headline worth remembering. And somewhere, in the corner of the old gym in LA, where it had all begun, the dent in the locker from Nate's frustrated fist still remained, not repaired, not painted over, left there on purpose as a small, silent reminder that even the deepest marks can become part of a better story if we're brave enough to write it.